So I've got this blank phone case that I really want to paint, and it's one of those like clear plastic ones. I've done one already. The artwork that I've chosen kind of gets me into trouble. I'm trying to avoid any issues, so that's why we're not using this, and we're gonna create a safe for work version. So here's my sketch. I don't know if that's gonna show up because it's like very blown out, but I'm gonna kind of resize it to the size that I want. I'm gonna take this case and then I'm gonna pop in the phone instead of this way, like you normally would use a case. I'm gonna pop it in the opposite way, and that way I can basically just trace that.
I should probably mention that you don't really need to do a sketch prior. You could just take a straight up photo and trace that. At the time, this was me kind of rushing to just record something. Anyway, so after this is done, I end up just taking that image. I've put the phone backwards in the case. I don't know that this would necessarily work with any of the iPhones with the curved edge, or if your phone has a curved edge. Any of the newer square-edged iPhones should work for this method. And of course, depending on what the material of your case is, the methods available to you for transferring an image onto your phone are going to vary, but this happens to be, I think, the most efficient way of doing this. And I want to maintain some of the transparency, so I don't want to prime it or paint everything white, because then I feel like it defeats the purpose of the phone case being transparent. So one step I forgot to mention is that the paint I'm using is Angelus paint, and I'm mixing it with that goopy stuff. It's called Too Hard. It's just to make your paints adhere to like harder plastics a little bit better. I've never actually tried to paint straight onto plastic without Too Hard, but I don't really want to risk it, especially if I'm like putting this much effort into the piece for it to just like peel off because it doesn't have like the right, I don't know, chemical structure or something. That said, you'll notice that Too Hard makes the paint really thin. That just means you gotta really build on your layers. But once you have that first layer of paint down, all the other layers of paint will show up. I think it's that initial layer on the plastic that's really like hard to deal with, but now that I've built up like a base skin tone, all the shadows and like highlights are a bit easier to apply. One of the more challenging aspects to painting something this small is just the surface area you have to work with. It's really hard to get in the little details of, let's say, the shadows around her nose or the kind of wrinkles around her eyes. Little details like that are just so much harder on something this tiny. But at the same time, you don't really have to use as much paint, so there's kind of a trade-off. It feels like a really different activity than what I'm used to, because I'm also kind of fighting the weird low opacity of the paints. One challenge that I found was, because the method of painting is a little bit different, trying to get it to adhere to what I consider to be my style, mixing pinks and cyans and colors that you wouldn't necessarily see in reality, but when it's painted it kind of optically blends. I had to do a lot of adapting on the fly. An example of this might be trying to load my brush with two different paints and then kind of sloshing them around, or like loading my brush with more paint than I think it needed and then trying to apply it. And also just trying different things. So I've been all blendy with the paints, and then now I'm kind of adding some stark black illustrative lines, I guess. And there are no real rules for this kind of thing. It's not like everything has to be painterly. This was achieving the look that I wanted, so I went with it. I feel like this shape is a little odd. I'm not necessarily happy with the paint stroke variety. It's kind of like symmetrical here and it's a little weird. So I want to add a few more colors, some more frenetic energy to this, and I think we're in a good spot. But overall, I'm liking where it's going. One of the reasons I chose this pose is that I really liked how it almost looked like she was coming towards you, like almost jumping out of the phone. That kind of foreshortened perspective, really in your face. I wanted something like loud, but not necessarily offensive or obnoxious. And so I try to unify the energy of the pose with the color choices, I guess the line choices as well. At this point, I'm really quite happy with how it's turning out. I feel like it's achieving, I'm not going to say my vision, because I can never really imagine what these are going to look like when I first start laying down paint. Most of the time I'm really just throwing myself in the deep end and hoping that all of my practice and all the sort of like paint reps that I've put in are gonna kind of save me. For something like this, I don't really have a plan. I'm just trying to see what works and what ends up making itself visible. For really fine lines, I'm just going in with a Sharpie, just because that'd be nightmarish to try to like use a brush for, and then I'm just signing it. And that concludes the actual painting part. So the final part of the process is taking some of this. Why did I stick my finger in there? God, I must have had like nothing around. Or I was just lazy. I was probably just lazy. Anyway, is mixing some of that Too Hard with a matte finisher, and that just gives like the final product an even coat, like a bit of shine, and most importantly, it protects the case from just like getting scratched up. These will last pretty long as you're not throwing your phone around or have like your keys and your phone in the same pocket.